Was Jeffrey Epstein a Mossad agent? This has all been lost, not unsurprisingly. There's lots of vested interests who don't want us to have this conversation. I think it's timely to talk about this, given the whole Jeffrey Epstein saga is kind of bringing down the British government at the moment. There's been quite a lot of discussion about Russia and his potential, I guess, links to the Russian intelligence agencies. But what about Israel? This is a conversation that needs to be had. There's no better person to speak to about this than Murtaza Hussain from the amazing Drotside News, who has been doing these incredible pieces, actually, about Israel and Jeffrey Epstein. Just unbelievable exposés of what was going on and his involvement. Great to speak to you. How are you doing?
Great to see you again, Owen. Glad to be here.
Let's just start. So, I mean, just first of all, before we just go into the details, I mean, there was just so much in these files. Is it fair to say, other than the likes of Drotside News, Drotside News, is this just being kind of ignored, even though there's actually this overwhelming amount of evidence about Israel and Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, I think that there is definitely a sort of contradiction in the amount of attention which is being paid to Epstein as an individual and some of his activities, and the sort of glaring omissions in a lot of the reporting and understanding of who he actually was and what he actually did. There's been a lot of coverage, at least in the U.S. press, and rightfully so, of his sex abuses, and which were very egregious and took place over a very long period of time and had many victims. But his perhaps even more salient or more extensive role as an intelligence operative and a political operative around the world, that has been very, very undercovered, actually, for the to date at least. With the latest U.S. Department of Justice releases of Epstein's correspondences, there's been a bit more interest in that subject. But I think that people have not really been putting together the pieces and making a cohesive picture of who he was and who he represented and what he did. Dropsite, we've been reporting on this story before the U.S. government releases that have taken place in December and February and January. We were doing a series of stories about Epstein and his role as an intelligence operative or asset, based on two sets of leaked email correspondences. One, the primary one being from former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who was a close associate of Epstein, had many, many years of contacts with him and worked together with him around the world on numerous different projects. And then secondly, a smaller set of hacked emails from Epstein's Yahoo inbox. So those emails paint a very interesting picture of who Epstein really was in a way, because he was basically this extremely powerful geopolitical broker and fixer, someone who was an independent actor in many ways. He represented sort of, people actually ask me all the time, was Jeffrey Epstein a Mossad agent or a CIA agent or a KGB agent? And I would say the answer is none of the above, actually. I think that he was someone who was sort of above any of those hierarchies. Because if you're an agent of the Mossad, for instance, you're answerable to the head of the Mossad and you're answerable to the Israeli prime minister. And I don't think Epstein's answerable to anyone like that. Who he may have been answerable to, it's an interesting question, but I think he was part of this global network of billionaires, this post-Cold War neoliberal establishment. He was a very powerful player in that. And he did act on behalf of the interests of the state of Israel, not because he's being ordered to do so, because he had a natural, ideological sympathy for it. And that's kind of a theme in many of our stories, and of which we have more forthcoming.
I mean, and please, by the way, everyone, do just have a look through these pieces, because they really are just incredible details in them. I mean, just to explain, Ehud Barak, so he's the former Prime Minister of Israel. What was this relationship? What was Ehud Barak up to post premiership, and what were they both up to together?
So Ehud Barak, the emails we have from him, they were hacked by an unknown hacker, and then they're released they're hacked by a group called Handala, which is speculated, we don't really know, it's speculated to be connected to the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence, and it was dumped online. And then it was picked up by this organization called the Distributed Denial of Secrets, which is like a whistleblower, information sharing website. It's kind of a successor to WikiLeaks in many ways. And it was posted there. and we were going through it, and it was supposed to be last year. And we found in these emails there are a lot of very interesting emails about Barak's activities during the last end of his last tenure as Israeli defense minister in 2013, 2012. And then also many years after that, including hundreds of messages, maybe even thousands of messages with Jeffrey Epstein. So at this point, Barack was just in public life still, or just leaving public life. And like a lot of people in the US and the UK and Israel, evidently, people who serve in public office at high levels, when they get into private life, they want to make money then. They want to bank on those connections in the private sector and generate income for themselves far beyond what they probably would have made when they were in office. So Epstein was somebody who was basically helping Barack do that. He was helping him pitch himself as someone, as a consultant, basically, to governments around the world, to companies, to the tech world, big tech people as well too. And it worked like this basically. So whenever Epstein did something, they'd always try to do a couple things at once. So Barack wanted to make money. Epstein had connections around the world who would probably pay Barack for his expertise or his consulting work. But they also had political goals. Even though Barack was leaving office in Israel, he still was attached to the state of Israel. He still cared about its well-being and furthering its political interests. So they would try to do things that would pitch Barack as a gateway to various Israeli services. He was a defense minister, a prime minister, and he would go to countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Mongolia, other countries in Africa, Nigeria, many other places around the world we're going to write about. And with Epstein's introduction and with his support, and he relied on Epstein for those things. He would say, well, we could pitch you a surveillance state to the Cote d'Ivoirian government or the Mongolian government. You could pitch them different services, which were based on, stuff that Israeli firms were doing. And these firms were linked to Israeli intelligence. They were founded by Israeli intelligence veterans, or they had active links to the Israeli intelligence establishment. And in Barack making those pitches, making those deals eventually with Epstein's support, he would then build a relationship between Israel and that country. And then later on in the year, 2 or 3 years, they would sign formal security arrangements or political deals between those countries and Israel. And the seed of that had been these conversations and these negotiations that Epstein and Barack had engaged in, with Barack as a private citizen. And I'll say very quickly as well, too, a very notable and important thing in these emails is looking at the power dynamic in the email, because you would think that Ehud Barak is one of the most influential people probably in the world, if you think of it just in big context, former prime minister, former defense minister, and he was just leaving that role, or even in that role during this time, 2012 and beyond. But really, the power dynamic in the emails was very favorable to Epstein. It wasn't like Epstein was dying to get Ehud Barak's attention or anything like that. It was really vice versa. It was Ehud Barak who was very eager to be in touch with Epstein, eager to be in his good books, happy to have his attention and things like that. So that really tells you a lot about who's really powerful and how power really operates here in these transnational parastatal networks beyond states, and which Epstein was a part of.
I guess that kind of speaks to your point about, I guess being a Mossad agent is a bit kind of small time or kind of menial compared to what was going on there, because you get the former Israeli prime minister, defense minister, kind of looking to Jeffrey Epstein as this kind of facilitator who could, we're talking here about kind of, Israel's relations in Africa and Gulf states. I mean, the sort of thing you'd expect the Israeli government to be doing institutionally. So what, tell us about that in terms of what was actually happening in terms of Cote d'Ivoire, and also with the Gulf states before the Abraham Accords were, which Donald Trump organized in his first term.
Yeah, so I'll mention the Abraham Accords issues. I think it's extremely important at the moment. So it's kind of hard to even remember this right now, but like 20 years ago, I guess I'm getting older, I can remember this myself. But in 2006, there was a big controversy in the United States over the purchase of some ports in the United States by a company called the Dubai Ports World. And in 2006, it was still the height of the Iraq War. Suspicion of Middle Eastern countries and people was at a very high ebb. And, there was a huge backlash to the idea that this deal could happen. Why would some random Arab country be buying ports in the United States? And ultimately, after a huge media outcry, the deal was canceled. So this episode was a very huge wake up call to elites in the Gulf, especially the Emirates itself, because they felt that they had really, they were very comfortable in Washington and they're comfortable in America, and they thought it would be fine for them to buy these ports. Didn't realize how out of touch with public opinion they were in the United States. So they felt very humiliated, and they kind of vowed that this would never happen again. And they started building closer ties with their American counterparts to try to build more influence, have their reputation be bolstered and what have you, using money and personal contacts and so forth. And one individual, our story we did a drop site is about this, is a relationship between the head of the Dubai Ports World, Sultan Salam, and Jeffrey Epstein. Because in 2006, when they had this problem, the individual that Salam started reaching out to and building a relationship with, who we seemed to know before, but maybe but developed a closer ties thereafter, was Epstein. So Epstein was kind of seen as a conduit to building power in the United States and building influence in the United States. And our emails we have, they're only from 2006 to 2019 when Epstein died, but they showed very close contact between Salam and Epstein. Epstein was like an advisor to Salam, effectively. And it's funny, for people who don't know, Dubai Ports World is one of the most biggest port operators and logistics operators in the world. They have ports, every part of the world. And a port is like one of the most important sort of pieces of infrastructure in the modern world, because it's kind of the conduit to all these supply chains that we all live at the behest of, or really under the influence of, or we rely upon, I should say, for maintaining the lives we live. They really, these ports are the most critical nodes in them. And Epstein, many years before our story came out, he was bragging to people in the press, while he's still alive, about the influence he had over ports in Berbera, which is in Somaliland, disputed territory of Somaliland, and elsewhere. And he claimed that he made tons of money from these ports. No one really knew if that was true or not until we saw these emails. And it turns out he was telling the truth, at least in one part, that he did have an extremely close relationship with the owner of that port, which was Sultan Salam, to Dubai Ports World. So this story kind of tracks the relationship between Salam and Epstein over the years, and the close relationship that Epstein developed with the UAE royal family and other Gulf royal families as well too. He did a lot for them. He was helping get medical care in Israel for Salam and his family. He was organizing genetic tests for the royal family of Dubai and all these things that require an extraordinary amount of trust. They also talked a lot about their sexual lives too, especially Salam talking with Epstein about his sexual life, and very vulgar, sophomoric sort of communications between them, discussing these things. And I don't it doesn't suggest that they were involved in illicit sexual activity per se, but it does suggest that there was a great deal of comfort in these relationships, even after Epstein had become known as for his involvement in sex trafficking and pedophilia and so forth. So, that relationship continued right up to Epstein's death. And they kind of showed we kind of the backstory of the Abraham Accords, because between 2006, when the Dubai Ports World scandal happened in the United States, and the signing of the Abraham Accords in 2020, there'd been tremendous change in the relationship. It was not even controversial now for Dubai Ports World or Dubai. The word Dubai is not controversial. The UAE is not controversial in America at all, including on the right. And it was really this laborious, sort of meticulous building of relationships between Epstein, Salam, and many other individuals whom they knew, that built this reformed pro-Israel, pro-Israel, US, UAE axis, you could say. And Epstein was a very unsung hero in building that.
I mean, in terms of actual Mossad/Israeli intelligence agents, there was Yoni Koren. Can you tell us about him and how he fit into all of this?
So, in this very intimate relationship that Epstein had with Barack, another individual who was part of it was this individual he mentioned was Yoni Koren. Yoni Koren was the chief of staff to Barack for many, many years, a very well-known chief of staff. And he was also a lifelong military intelligence agent in Israel as well. So Yoni Koren is a story we did also a drop site, but he basically, in the later years of Epstein's life, Yoni Koren spent extended stretches of time in New York, staying at a property which was owned by Epstein. And this is an apartment building in the Upper East Side in New York. He stayed in there for weeks at a time. And this is the same building where Epstein was alleged to be carrying out the trafficking of young women at this time as well, too. So, what he was doing there at that time has never really been clarified. On all the speculation about Epstein's intelligence ties, this is a very concrete sort of, flashing red light about some of the most egregious ties that were said to be had. As well, there were allegations have been raised that there was surveillance at of the properties taking place of illicit sexual encounters between people for use in blackmail. The story does not substantiate that per se. We don't have enough evidence to say that. But an intelligence agent staying at the same place where it's alleged that sex trafficking and blackmail is taking place, that certainly warrants some sort of scrutiny and attention, especially if people are raising these allegations in general. And then also in the story, we pointed that there were, suspicious money transfers taking place
Mm.
around the same time that Corn was there, and dead drops of, what seemed to be dead drops of material or even people or something like that taking place again in New York. And all this was happening at the same time that Corin and Barack were under surveillance by the NSA, the National Security Agency in the United States. Or they were, you know, trying watching them at the same time that they were operating in the U.S. So that shows there was not the level of trust in them between, despite the fact that the U.S. and Israel has a close relationship, there was a suspicion of what they were up to in New York at that time, and our story kind of goes into the depths of that.
Do you have a view on the thesis that Epstein was being used to gather compromat on politicians and celebrities for blackmail purposes linked to Israel? I mean, that's obviously the theory that keeps circulating.
Well, I'm always very conservative in my conclusions and what the emails we have and so forth, what they show. But a couple things I will say is that if you look at the and more information is going to come out. We will only have a fraction of the documentation so far, but if you look at there's a lawsuit between J.P. Morgan and the U.S. Virgin Islands, in which the U.S. Virgin Islands sued J.P. Morgan for involvement in facilitating Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking. Now, in those lawsuit documents, there is a cited email between Epstein and Soleim and an executive at J.P. Morgan, where they're discussing a sex scandal in Liberia, African nation of Liberia. And they're talking about how an individual in that country had to resign from high office because the photo of them was found engaged in illicit sexual activity. And then, according to the lawsuit documents, in that same conversation, Epstein then shares a photo of that individual engaged in illicit sexual activity, the same photo that resulted in the destruction of their political career. So that's not dispositively proof of blackmail, but it's kind of one of many sort of suggestive interactions contained in that lawsuit or his correspondence with others over the years. Um, so I think it's very plausible, and people have very informed people have raised that accusation in the past as well too. But I think there's multiple layers to this as well too, because people think of blackmail, they think of coercive blackmail, like had a camera, he confronted somebody, they were forced to basically do his bidding thereafter, based on an element of coercion. But I think that, something more pervasive and more normalized was happening was that Epstein, without a doubt, was facilitating people's illicit sexual encounters. And whether it was illegal all the time or just things he didn't want people to know, would have gotten them in trouble. He knew about it because it's taking place on his island and at his properties, but also he was facilitating it.
Hmm.
So, but by nature, he had leverage over these people because he knew things about them that they didn't want people to know. And he knew them very intimately. He could substantiate them. And he was, again, like I said, he was facilitating them, in fact. So, regardless of whether he was coercively blackmailing people or not, he was exerting influence on them just by the nature of the role he was playing and the knowledge he had and what he was doing. So I think it's almost like a moot point because he was definitely influencing very, very powerful people all around the world in interactions with one another because of the fact he was running the sex trafficking operation in addition to the sort of intelligence and political operation that he was running as well too. So when the two are looked at in conjunction with one another, the implication of blackmail and undue influence becomes kind of inherent in some ways, rather than needing to be, like I said, coercively done.
Just in terms of him advancing Israel's interests, I mean, two elements of that. For example, the Leviathan gas field, which is estimated to enough gas to meet Israel's domestic needs for 40 years, so kind of its energy independence, and also pro-Israel philanthropy, so kind of raising money for charities to help Israeli interests. So he tell us about his role in all of that.
Well, one very important thing to understand about Epstein is how he became rich. And this question is sort of glared in ambiguity to some degree. And we did stories about his origins in Iran Contra and
Mm.
the people he knew during that period, the money laundering and so forth. Those involved facilitating that episode. But one very important aspect in the road to him becoming a very, very wealthy person, probably controlling billions of dollars, maybe tens of billions of dollars, perhaps, was his relationship with a man named Leslie Wexner. Leslie Wexner is a clothing magnate in the United States, and he was the founder of many of these different brands. People probably know, like Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie and Fitch and so forth. In the early 90s, it's very surprising to everybody, but Leslie Wexner made a heretofore relatively unknown person, or almost completely unknown person, named Jeffrey Epstein, the power of attorney over his entire financial empire. So, this random, pretty young guy at the time became the power of attorney of this huge $1 billion sprawling empire, and all the money that came about with it. And also, in addition to that, a corresponding philanthropic entity that Wexner also controlled, a very powerful charity, the Wexner Foundation, which funds pro-Israel causes in the United States and around the world. Well, you can say primarily the United States, but they have the links to Israel and so forth as well, by nature of that. So Epstein was sort of like, he kind of did all these things as inheritor of this Wexner fortune. And the way Wexner had a natural ideological sympathy to Israel that he is actualized or instantiated through his fortune, Epstein then started taking over that. And, for background, at the time that Wexner handed over this fortune to Epstein, he was under investigation, or there was the investigation into him in Ohio for murdering a lawyer. So, there's also ties to the mob and so forth ingrained in this whole rise. So, when Epstein became the inheritor of this fortune, he became magnitudes more powerful than he was before. And he started becoming his broker for Israeli interests around the world, in addition to the interests of other countries as well, too. But, Israel was very close to the whole Wexner empire. And, one of the things you raised, it was this Leviathan gas deal. And again, going back to this JP Morgan lawsuit, there was an email kit that came out in their communication, which showed that Epstein was the person that JP Morgan relied on when they need to get access to Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss this gas deal. So that was just one example of many when people who you think are the most powerful people in the world, like prime ministers or defense ministers or senior executives at investment banks, when they wanted to talk to each other, they actually rely on Epstein to set it up. They need Epstein to make the connections or get them in the room. And he was seen as someone more powerful than all those people. And the Leviathan deal is an example of that. And how he became that way, his inheritance or his control of the Wexner Foundation was at least one major clue to that.
The thing I want to ask about is Russia, because I think a lot of people got a bit cynical about this being raised, which is they thought this is all a bit of a distraction. Was Epstein really a Russian agent? And that I mean, I know in the British press has been repeatedly raised. I mean, it has been noted. I mean, the Telegraph said that, for example, he installed secret cameras with the help of, well, they're known as the Russians. The Russians make them in handy. This is apparently what Jeffrey Epstein said, and he asked them to buy 3 motion detected hidden cameras that record, which obviously links to this idea again of compromat on behalf of Russia. Therefore, we've gone down this route again of, is Trump being blackmailed by Russia through Jeffrey Epstein? What do you think? What do you make of all the Russia stuff?
Well, I have noticed this recently, and it's very interesting because I haven't heard. This is a very recent new claim, and I think it's coming about now because now there's pretty much overwhelming evidence that he was a very important political and intelligence actor, Epstein. But everyone wants to attribute him to a favored political party and deem that the whole end of the story. So people are saying that was he a KGB agent, sent to blackmail the president on behalf of Vladimir Putin. That seems to be the implication in a lot of these claims. I could think that say it's absolutely not the case, because that would you would require him to be answerable to the KGB or answerable to Putin and so forth. And you can clearly see from his communications he's not. He's like more like a broker or intermediary between different factions, rather than an employee of any state institution anywhere. So I think that's not the case. But I do think that there is this connection between Epstein, Russian elites, American elites, Israeli elites, and elites in other countries, because he had ties with these Russian oligarchs, and he had connections to senior officials in the Russian security establishment, whom he could rely on to serve or to work, respond to his requests to be interlocutors for various geopolitical negotiations. And a story we wrote about was how he helped Israeli elites, in this case, Ehud Barak, and Russian counterparts create back channel negotiations over the Syria conflict in 2013. It was Epstein who helped set those talks up. So I think that, again, like, I don't think he was a Mossad agent. I don't think he was a KGB agent. I think that he was something kind of above and beyond those things, but that entailed him having connections to both Israel and Russia, and as well as the United States. And I do think that he acted, though, on behalf of the state of Israel out of personal conviction and ideological sympathy and so forth, which is evident in his communications. But I don't think that the Russia line of inquiry is illegitimate, though. I do think that we should investigate his ties to Russia, because when we're investigating his ties to Russia, it's not that he's a KGB agent. We're investigating his involvement in global corruption. And post-Cold War, Russian elites have been integral to the proliferation of this like neoliberal, you know, this isn't the right word, but it's transnational corruption that's taking place, that's been enabled by the end of the Cold War, and his connection to that is integral. His connection to Russian elites in that part is integral, and we'll have a story drops out about that. Well, at least one, and maybe more stories about that coming very soon. But it's something which is correct, but it's not correct to say that he's being deployed by Putin or someone else to blackmail people in the United States or the UK.
Just finally, it's quite a banal question, but I think it's got an interesting answer, which is a lot of people look at this and just think he's basically acting as an intermediary for global elites and also running a sex trafficking business. How the hell does this guy have so much time to do all of these things? It's just
Well, in the previous tranche of Epstein file releases from the government, you can also see his schedules, his calendars from a certain number of years. Now, in the calendars, it's really interesting because he goes on he's busy all the time. He's meeting people all the time. He's on these junkets, these trips around the world, short hop trips all over Africa, all over Middle East, Europe, everywhere. And does make you wonder, how did he have the time to engage in all these conversations? And in between his calendars, we also see his emails. He's made brokering deals all over the world. He's involved in intricate diplomatic arrangements, tech deals, biotechnology, AI, all these things he's interested in. He's convening seminars and symposiums about various subjects, while also setting up back channel political negotiations, and also running a sex trafficking ring, and doing all these things, spending time on his island and inviting people there and so forth. So it does make you wonder how even one of those things is difficult for an individual to be able to manage. He had an assistant, he had some level of staff, but even that didn't seem like it would be enough to manage this level of complexity. It does suggest that maybe Epstein was not an individual per se. Maybe he was an organization, or he was a network. That may be a better way of thinking about it. And I think that question is something which needs to more investigation and more time to discern the reality of. But one thing I would say is that I don't think that whatever was going on, this corruption and this transnational dealing and even the sex crimes and so forth, I don't think it would be wise to assume it ended with him or ended with his death in 2019 or his incarceration in 2019. I think it continued on. I think that these types of parastatal uh, exercises of power continue to exist, and individuals whose names we may or may not know continue to operate them. And he was merely a one actor in that network over that amount of time. So, yeah, I don't think that. I think it would be very difficult for him to do that on his own, and I don't think that the story is over, even with the passing of him as an individual.
really, really fascinating stuff and truly excellent journalism, the sort of journalism which if we had a functioning sort of media, old style media ecosystem, would be covered by various newspapers, but it's been left to the brilliant journalists like yourself at Dropsite News. And as you say, there's much more to come. So everyone do check out and do support Dropsite News, supported by people like yourselves to do the journalism that they do. But please like and subscribe, leave your comments, leave your thoughts, share the video. Murtaza, honestly, great honor. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.